You're being let go, effective immediately. The words, delivered with the bored finality of someone swatting a fly, hung in the air, heavier than any judgment I'd ever faced. He didn't meet my eyes, his gaze fixed somewhere past my shoulder, as if my presence was an inconvenience that had finally been dealt with. The knot in my stomach tightened, a familiar, sickening clench. This wasn't just a layoff, it was a declaration. My life before this moment, before the sterile air of his glass-walled office and the dismissive sweep of his hand, was a carefully constructed edifice. I was good at my job, better than good, in fact. I'd poured years into this company, not just hours, but my intellectual capital, my late nights, my weekends. I'd built relationships, fostered trust, and, most importantly, I'd developed a proprietary system that was the company's secret sauce, its competitive edge. It was elegant, efficient, and undeniably mine. My normal was the hum of innovation, the quiet satisfaction of problem solving, the predictable rhythm of a career I'd painstakingly built. But beneath the surface, there was always him. The CEO's son. Always there, a shadow of inherited privilege, an embodiment of the company's distorted family tree. His presence was a constant, low-grade irritant, a reminder that my place was always temporary, always conditional on the whims of those born into power. He rarely did any real work, preferring to glide through meetings on the coattails of his father's legacy, his ideas often vague, his contributions negligible, yet his ego, vast and unyielding. There was the time, a year prior, when I'd presented a radical new approach to client acquisition. I'd spent weeks meticulously detailing the strategy, the projected ROI, the risk mitigation. He'd listened, or rather, he'd pretended to listen, fidgeting with his designer watch. When I finished, he'd leaned back, a slow, patronizing smile spreading across his face. "That's interesting, Sarah. Very thorough. But I was thinking something a bit more disruptive. Something with more flair." He then proceeded to regurgitate a half-baked idea he'd probably overheard in a bar, lacking any substance or feasibility. The irony wasn't lost on me, my thoroughness was dismissed as dull, his superficiality branded as visionary. My team had been forced to pivot, to spend months chasing his ephemeral disruption, ultimately yielding less than half of what my initial plan had promised. I'd bitten my tongue, a familiar ache blooming in my chest. Then there was the project deadline, the one that kept me tethered to my desk for nearly 72 hours straight. I'd been leading a critical product launch, a delicate operation that required absolute precision. He'd breezed in on the final day, smelling faintly of expensive cologne and entitlement, demanding a minor cosmetic change to the packaging. "It just needs a bit more pop, you know." My dad always said first impressions matter. He hadn't stayed to see the fallout, the frantic scramble to accommodate his whim, the hours lost. He hadn't seen the sleepless nights, the missed family dinners. He just wanted his pop, a fleeting aesthetic adjustment that had no bearing on the product's actual function or market appeal. The silence I'd offered then was a deliberate choice, a strategic withholding of my frustration. I'd learned early on that overt displays of emotion, especially anger, were interpreted as weakness, as unprofessionalism, particularly when directed at someone of his stature. My quiet endurance was my shield, my way of surviving the suffocating atmosphere of their gilded cage. The day it all came crashing down was a Tuesday. The air in the office was thick with the usual pre-lunch buzz, the distant clatter of keyboards, the murmur of conversations. I'd been called into his office, a summons that usually meant a minor request or a need for me to clarify something he'd misunderstood. He was sitting behind his expansive desk, the same one his father had used, polished to a mirror sheen. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. He gestured vaguely to the chair opposite him. "Sit down, Sarah." His tone was casual, almost friendly, a deceptive warmth that always preceded a storm. He picked up a thick manila folder, his fingers tracing the edges with exaggerated slowness. He didn't open it. Instead, he spoke, his voice carefully modulated, devoid of any genuine emotion. "We've been doing some restructuring. Evaluating departments. And your role, it's been deemed redundant." Redundant. The word echoed in the silence, a hollow sound. My mind raced, trying to process the absurdity. Redundant? After everything I'd done? After the system I'd built, the one that was now the backbone of their entire operation? I looked at him, searching for a flicker of doubt, a hint of regret, anything to suggest this wasn't entirely his decision. But there was nothing. His eyes were clear, devoid of empathy, fixed on some unseen point beyond me. He continued, his voice picking up a slightly more authoritative edge, as if reciting from a script. We'll, of course, provide a standard severance package. And your last day will be today. He pushed the folder across the desk. HR will be in touch about the details. He stood up, a clear signal that the conversation was over. He didn't offer a handshake, didn't offer condolences, didn't offer an explanation beyond the sterile word, redundant. He just turned and walked towards the window, looking out at the cityscape as if my entire professional existence was merely a fleeting inconvenience he was now glad to be rid of. The sheer audacity, the casual cruelty of it, was like a physical blow. He hadn't even bothered to fabricate a plausible reason. He just dispensed with me. The walk back to my desk felt like miles. The office hummed on, oblivious to the seismic shift that had just occurred in my world. My colleagues offered sympathetic smiles, heads bowed, as if acknowledging a shared misfortune. But I knew, with a chilling certainty, that this wasn't a shared misfortune. This was a targeted strike. I sat down, my hands trembling slightly, and pulled out my laptop. The fury that had been simmering beneath the surface began to crystallize into a cold, sharp resolve. I didn't have the luxury of explosive anger. My career, my future, depended on a different kind of response. I opened a secure, encrypted folder, a contingency I'd created years ago, a digital vault of my own making. It contained every meticulously documented step of the system I had developed, every algorithm, every strategic blueprint, every line of code. It was my intellectual property, registered and protected. Beside it, I opened a separate document, a detailed legal agreement I had drafted, outlining the licensing terms for my proprietary system. It specified exorbitant fees for usage, strict clauses regarding termination, and clear penalties for unauthorized access or misappropriation. I had never shared the full extent of this document with anyone, least of all with the entitled individuals who ran this company. I worked with a focused intensity, my fingers flying across the keyboard. Each keystroke was deliberate, each saved file a tiny victory. I meticulously compiled a summary, a concise yet damning report, detailing the system's development, its integration, and its undeniable financial impact on the company. I attached screenshots of my original design documents, dated and time-stamped. I then appended the licensing agreement, highlighting the clauses related to termination and continued usage. I packaged it all into a single, password-protected PDF, the password itself a reference to an obscure piece of literature I knew he, and likely his father, would never understand. I sent the package to my personal email, then drafted a curt, formal email addressed to the CEO himself, copying the head of legal and the company's board of directors. The subject line was stark: unauthorized use of proprietary system. I stated, with a chilling lack of emotion, that effective immediately upon my termination, all licensing agreements for my intellectual property were null and void. I then attached the PDF and requested a formal acknowledgement of receipt within 24 hours, stating that continued use of the system without a new, mutually agreed upon licensing contract would be considered a direct violation of copyright and intellectual property law, with significant legal repercussions. I didn't elaborate, didn't plead, didn't explain. The facts spoke for themselves. I hit send. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the soft click of the send button. I then began the process of clearing my personal files from my work computer, a ritualistic shedding of the past. Within hours, the office descended into a controlled chaos. My phone began to buzz incessantly, a barrage of frantic texts from colleagues, ranging from concerned to outright panicked. Then came the calls, mostly from his father, the CEO, his voice a mixture of disbelief and sputtering rage. He demanded explanations, threatened lawsuits, and, in his fury, inadvertently confirmed that my system was indeed indispensable. He barked about sons and family loyalty, revealing the true depth of his son's miscalculation and his own blind spot. The CEO's son, however, remained conspicuously silent. I knew he wouldn't call. He wouldn't deign to engage with someone he considered beneath him, especially not when faced with the stark reality of his own incompetence. The ensuing days were a blur of legal maneuvering. The company, caught flat-footed, was crippled. Their entire operation, built on the foundation of my work, ground to a halt. They couldn't process orders, couldn't manage inventory, couldn't interact with clients without my system. The board, faced with the potential collapse of the company the threat of massive legal penalties, was in damage control mode. I received an offer, a lifeline of sorts, for a temporary, month-to-month licensing fee that was 10 times my previous salary, with the stipulation that they hire a team of independent auditors to assess the system's true value for a long-term renegotiation. The CEO's son was, of course, nowhere to be seen. He had vanished from the company's internal communications, a ghost in his own father's machine. The news filtered through the grapevine. He had been effectively exiled, sent to manage a failing subsidiary overseas, a demotion disguised as an opportunity. His reputation, once bolstered by his father's name, was now irrevocably tarnished, a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms. I sat at my kitchen table, the morning sun warming my face. The silence in my apartment was a welcome change from the cacophony of the past few days. No frantic texts, no urgent calls. Just the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the occasional chirping of birds outside. I poured myself a cup of coffee, the rich aroma filling the air. I hadn't sought vindication, I had sought justice. And justice, I had learned, often arrived not with a bang, but with a profound, unnerving silence. The satisfaction wasn't in their downfall, but in the quiet, undeniable proof of my own capability, a testament to the power of meticulous work in a well-guarded strategy. They had underestimated me, dismissed me, and in doing so, had delivered themselves into a trap of their own making. The consequences, for them, were steep and far-reaching. For me, it was simply the quiet closing of a chapter written with patience, precision, and a profound understanding of the weight of one's own creations.